Your great-grandparents really did have to walk 5 miles in the snow to get to school. Here's how high schools have evolved since the 1890 to 2022. Today's child labor laws would be unthinkable to early American families. With the exception of professional or fairly wealthy households, parents often couldn't make ends meet without children working the family farms, pitching in at family businesses, or getting jobs in mills, mines, or factories outside the home. Some students had to travel very far to school. It was fairly common for students to travel by horse and have to cross fields and gates just to get to school. What nowadays would just be Uber drive. In 1910, the vast majority of African American students still lived in the South, where schools were far poorer than in the North. Average school years in the South were only 121 days, and there were no attendance laws. Black teachers' salaries were also dismally low. By 1920, around 59% of kids went to school. Numbers were approximately 20% lower for non-white students, and most of those students only attended school for a few years to learn basic English and math. In the 1930s, when kids were misbehaving during class, they would get spanked, paddled, lashed, or had palms or knuckles rapped with a ruler. Although corporal punishment in schools is outlawed in most of the United States today, it's legal in 19 mostly southern states including Louisiana, Georgia, and Arkansas. American high school education was transformed in the 1940s. At all levels it became better organized, better funded, and more standardized across the country. The main reason for these changes was World War II. The war exposed many problems within American education. School life in the 1950s was harder than today because the facilities were few and inadequate. When the baby boom generation reached school age, suddenly, classes were packed. Some classrooms had as many as 40 students. From the Vietnam War to the Civil Rights Movement, there was increasing awareness about politics and racial injustice even among teenagers. There were riots and protests. Male high school students also waited anxiously if they were going to be drafted and sent to Vietnam. Then, drugs became a thing towards the end of the 60s. It was mostly weed, weak by today's standards, and acid in those days. The 80s were known for the crazy fashion, pop music was at an all-time best, and synthesizers were the hit of the moment. Hairstyles, freedom and parties are all fun, but the education system was an all-time low. Studies showed that American elementary and secondary students consistently tested lower in science and math than their counterparts in Japan. And in what was then West Germany, in the former Soviet Union, evidence was clear that students were learning less in school environments filled with rising drug use and violence. The high school experience in the 90s was pretty much identical to high school in the 80s other than a few minor differences. In the 90s, there were CDs instead of cassettes, and the PlayStation also came out in the 90s. However, one of the major concerns of parents during the 1990s was their children's protection while at school. When asked about school's shortcomings, parents named the safety and welfare of their children as their greatest fear. The media repeatedly covered incidents of shootings by students not only in high schools, but also in middle schools across the country. Now we entered the 2000s, when cell phones began taking off. I'd say by 2006 is when most people had them. The whole cameras and video recording took off. Texting starting becoming daily life stuff to the point where schools had restrictions on cell phone use. By 2010, social media starting to get huge, not as we know it now, but much bigger than in mid-2000s with MySpace, and then the transition to Facebook and YouTube. So from mid-2000s all through the 2010s, high school didn't change so much, but it was and it continues to be quite the same, despite technological advances throughout the culture. By 2020, we get a historic moment in high school history with the COVID-19 pandemic. As we all know, social distancing started to become enforced, and schools were shut off for good, and classes were fully online through video calls. Now in 2022, slowly but surely we are going back to normal in high school atmospheres by actually attending school, and everything else that high school is all about, not just the studying. Thanks for watching another evolution video. Let us know in the comments video ideas for our next evolution videos. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos every sunny day.